Welcome to MysteryCon. This is the story of a strange object that fell near Las Vegas and the signals, silence, and surveillance that followed. It started with a flash in the sky and a family's terrified 911 call. It ended with classified files, vanished witnesses, and a truth hidden in plain sight. I'm a journalist who thought I was chasing a story. But what I found was something already inside us. This isn't about aliens landing. It's about something learning to look, like a sand spreading, one mind at a time. And the question is, if the truth is reflecting through us, how would we even know it's not our own? Stay sharp, stay quiet, and don't trust what you see in the mirror. It wasn't the light that caught my attention. It was the silence that followed it. Before we dive in, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to stay tuned on. Drop a comment, letting us know what time it is and where you're watching from. Let's begin. Midnight, May 1st, 2023. A brilliant arc of blue-white light sliced across the night sky in suburban Las Vegas, like some impossible scalpel tearing open the air. It didn't flash and fade like lightning. It held long enough for several neighbors to look up and remember the color of it, the texture of it. One of them said it looked like electricity, but moved like thought. Another said it made their skin feel like it was vibrating inside out. That's not something you forget. A family the Kenmores called. 911. I've listened to the call at least 24 times. The father's voice is steady, clipped, like he's trying not to scare his kids, but you can hear it in his throat, something close to awe or terror. He tells dispatch there are beings in the yard, not people, beings. 8 feet tall, glowing eyes, motionless. One kid is crying in the background. The other whispers something that's hard to make out, but when I boosted the audio and ran it through a filter, it sounded like they're still looking at me. The police showed up. One officer, on record, said he saw the light too, described it as vertical lightning. His body cam caught a streak and some noise distortion, maybe, or interference. The official report listed the event as a disturbance. Nothing else, but online. It exploded. TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, Telegram. The story spun out in 100 directions, most of them insane. The footage got sliced, looped, AI enhanced. People added music, voiceovers, alien, but the core footage, the one with the streak and the silent backyards, stayed the same. It felt real, and that's where I came in. I found the story 3 days later while researching something else entirely. I run a Podcastico's niche show about government overreach, unexplained tech, and the occasional vanishing. It's not flashy, no jump scares, no aliens, until then, anyway. I'd been looking into a cancelled satellite launch tied to a defense subcontractor when someone dropped a comment in one of my archived threads. Maura won't touch Vegas. She knows the Kenmores saw something. I should have ignored it. I've seen a million comments like that, but there was something about the phrasing that hooked into my ribs. Not if something happened, but what they saw. That kind of certainty always sets off alarms in my head, so I dug in. Most of the coverage was useless reaction videos, armchair debunkers, TikTok psychics, but there were patterns under the noise. The Kenmore family hadn't backed off their story, not even under pressure. They didn't seem like the type to seek attention. The father worked construction. The mother had no social media presence. The teenage son, Angel, had posted some weird art years ago. Fractals, distorted faces, but nothing about aliens or conspiracies. And then there was the cop, his face in the footage. I've seen that kind of look before. It's the look of someone who just realized they've walked into a situation that makes no damn sense. I filed a FOIA request that same day. I didn't expect much. Most of the time, getting anything back takes weeks, and even then, it's redacted into oblivion. But this time, the footage showed up 2 days later, fully intact. No redactions. That's when I got nervous, because when something comes that easy, it's not a favor, it's bait. I watched the body cam video in a hotel room outside Portland. It was raining, the room was quiet, except for a drip from the bathroom tap and the buzz of the mini fridge. I played it through twice without noticing anything unusual. Then, at 12 minutes and 47 seconds, the feed skipped to single frame glitched. When I paused and zoomed in, there it was. A reflection, not on glass, and something curved and dark, an eye catching the light. Way too high off the ground to be human. The officer didn't react. He didn't see it, but the camera did. I sent the clip to a contact of mine, a former forensic video analyst. She ran it through 3 programs. No evidence of tampering. She just wrote back, "Whatever that is, it's in the raw data." That's when I started a timeline. That same night, within a 10-mile radius, there were power surges. Streetlights blew out. 2 neighbors reported their cars stalling for no reason. One woman said her dog wouldn't come out of the closet for hours. I logged every report I could find. Then I found the Reddit post. A user named Khan_Transit87 said they were driving along the perimeter of Nellis Air Force Base when they saw a blue light drop out of the sky like it was falling sideways. They posted a grainy still from a dash cam. 2 hours later, their account was gone. No trace, deleted history. That wasn't just paranoia, that was cleanup. I've worked too. Many stories where silence isn't accidentally, it's designed. Most people don't notice how fast things disappear online. It's not like it used to be. Now, a story can go viral and vanish within the same news cycle. Choked by noise, algorithmically buried under viral junk. And yet, this one lingered. People kept coming back to it, not because they believed in aliens, but because they knew something wasn't adding up. I started getting DMIs, first from randos. They're real. The government knows. Check the desert, Rachel. But then, something else. One message just said, "Look into Peregrine." I'd heard of them before Peregrine. Dynamics. They build propulsion systems, claim to focus on advanced materials. Mostly, they exist in the footnotes of defense, budgets, and congressional subcommittees. Nothing flashy. But the more I looked, the more I found. Patents filed with vague descriptions, like gravitational vector counterbalance, and contracts hundreds of millions in materials recovery. An evaluation. That phrase stuck with me. Recovery, evaluation, like something was already out there, waiting to be found. That was when I stopped thinking of this as a side story. The Kenmore event wasn't isolated. It wasn't even the point. It was an eco-something, left behind when the real event was already over. But someone had noticed, and someone didn't want it noticed for long. So I did what I always do when the story starts pulling me in deeper than I'm comfortable with. I bought a new notebook, packed a go bag, and shut down the podcast's public feeds. I didn't tell Jordan. I didn't even tell my sister. Not yet. Not until I was sure what I was stepping into. This wasn't just about a light in the sky. It was about what comes next when the light fades and something stays behind. And the more I stared at that glitch in the footage, the more I started to wonder, What if we didn't see them first? What if they were already watching? There's a moment when you start asking the right questions, where the world stops feeling familiar. Things look the same on the surface. Your coffee maker still sputters in the morning, the sidewalk still cracks beneath your shoes, but underneath there's a new vibration. Like the floorboards know what you've started and want no part in it. I met the Kenmore family 2 weeks after the incident. They agreed to talk only after I offered full anonymity and agreed not to record. I drove to a neutral location, empty church basement off Sahara Avenue. No cameras, no Wi-Fi, just bad lighting and metal folding chairs. The parents looked exhausted, not performatively tired, but hollowed out, like people who'd stopped sleeping for reasons they didn't want to articulate. The father, Greg, did most of the talking. Sandy hair, construction calloused hands, too tired to posture. He kept glancing at his wife, as if needing her eyes to finish his sentences. She stayed quiet, arms folded, jaw tight. Angel, the teenager, sat off to the side, head down, hoodie up. He didn't say a word. Greg walked me through that night. The light, the way the air changed, thicker, almost metallic, the static in his ears. He said his yard had gone completely silent. You ever notice the quiet? He asked me. When? There's no dogs, no wind, not even crickets. Like the world turned off, but forgot to tell you. Then came the beings. He called them figures, never aliens. Said they didn't move like people. They didn't walk. They relocated, like blinking but sideways. His words, I didn't press for more. You don't interrupt someone trying to explain a trauma they don't even have language for yet. The weirdest detail came from his daughter. She said one of the figures mimicked her voice. Not a scream or a word, just the tone. It sounded like me, she said, but empty. Like if you took out all the meaning and left just the shape. She didn't elaborate. No one asked her to. I didn't push hard in that first meeting. I knew the feeling in the room, tight like wire. You tug too much, it snaps. But I got permission to submit their 911 audio and the police footage for outside review. Greg seemed surprised I'd go that far. I told him I don't chase stories, I walk into them. Back home, I started with the footage again. I knew the frame, 1247, the glitch. I pulled the raw file into my editing suite and slowed it to 1/16th speed. This time, I noticed something else, a faint flicker in the corner of the yard. Not a reflection, a distortion. Something warping the edge of the pixels, like heat off asphalt, but vertical. I isolated the frame and sent it to Lena, a former video analyst I used to work with back in Seattle. She messaged me back in less than an hour. No compression artifacts. This isn't lens flare or dropped data. Whatever's there, it was in the original capture. No tampering. That's when I started to feel the first tug of panic. Because the only thing worse than a hoax is something real that no one's prepared for. From there, things escalated. I started pulling community reports from Las Vegas public logs. Between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. on May 1st, there were 13 separate 911 calls about power surges or unexplained outages. Several came from within a mile of the Kenmore house. 2 described cars that stalled my intersection. 1 mentioned a hum in the trees. I compiled it, all timestamps, locations, audio clips, and plotted them on a map. It formed a rough arc, moving east to west, cutting straight across the southern end of the city. The line ended near Nellis Air Force Base. That's when I remembered the Reddit post. The user who said they'd seen the light from the highway posted a blurry still, then vanished. Their account con_transit87 was gone without a trace. Deleted profile, scrubbed comments, even dead links on web archive sites. It was like they never existed. I've seen that before. When a cleanup job isn't just about hiding information, it's about erasing the existence of the person who held it. I called Jordan, my tech contact, alias Drift Static. Lives off-grid, runs 6 air-gapped machines in a bunker outside Tahoe. I asked him to run a scrape on any cached IP metadata tied to con_transit87. He said he'd try, but that kind of deletion usually meant one thing: federal or state-level intervention while he worked. I filed another FOIA this time for dispatch records around Nellis AFB that night, not expecting a miracle. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to locals, people who posted, then deleted. A dog trainer whose pets hid in the shower during the light event. A schoolteacher who said her hearing went blank for 30 seconds. Most ghost me after a single exchange. That's when I got the envelope. No return address, just my name, handwritten, no postage. Left in my apartment mailbox. Inside was a USB drive, unlabeled, wrapped in a single post-it note that said, "Check 0 hours 12 minutes and 47 seconds. You missed something." I plugged it into a burner laptop. No malware. Just one video file, body cam footage again, but with overlays. Infrared, thermal, spectrographic filters. Someone had used high-end analysis software, the kind reserved for federal image forensics. And they were right. At exactly 12:47, in thermal view, you could clearly see 3 heat signatures, each taller than a man, stationary. Then one moved. Not walked, moved. Instantaneous lateral displacement. Frame-to-frame teleportation. I don't use that word lightly. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because I realized something horrifying. This wasn't surveillance footage, it was training material. The overlays, the file format, the analysis, it wasn't for the public. Someone had been studying this, someone with access, which meant the event wasn't unexpected. It was observed, monitored, maybe even facilitated. That's when Jordan called. "I found a partial signature," he said. "That deleted Reddit user. Their last IP pinged from a VPN exit node inside Nevada. Guess who owns the node? Tell me." Peregrine. Dynamics, but not a public listing. Internal server registry. And get this, their DNS path routes back to a military contractor's subnet, Nellis adjacent. That's when it all clicked. The Kenmore incident wasn't random. It was a test site, a controlled drop, and someone inside didn't just know about it, they were watching. I closed my laptop, checked the blinds. Outside, everything looked normal, but I've learned that normal is where the lies like to live. Something happened in that backyard, and I was no longer just reporting on it. I was standing in the middle of it. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, though I probably should have been, but because I couldn't stop running scenarios in my head. Who sent me that footage? Why now? What did they want me to do with it? And most of all, how deep did this go? At 3:22 a.m., I closed my laptop and made a decision. I wasn't going to sit back and react anymore. If I wanted answers, I had to push first. I started with Peregrine Dynamics. Their official site was sterile. Stock photos of smiling engineers, buzzwords like resilience and precision solutions, all wrapped in vague language about defense logistics and aerospace recovery. But buried in the site's source code was something, a string of metadata tags referencing non-standard acquisition and composite retrieval. No explanation, no links, just placeholders, likely missed during a cleanup. I started pulling contract records from public procurement databases. Between 2021 and early 2023, Peregrine received over $230 million in classified subcontracts routed through the Department of Energy, not Defense. That stood out. The DOE doesn't typically deal with aerospace unless there's a radiation signature involved. That suggested something physical had been recovered, something not just exotic, but potentially unstable. Most contracts were tagged to Project Radiant Lantern, the same phrase the Reddit user had hinted at. I searched every open database, but nothing came up, not even in defense contractor chatter forums. That's when the message hit my inbox. No subject, no sender name, just a single sentence. If you want to know what fell that night, follow Radiant Lantern. An hour later, my podcast server crashed. The back-end panel went dark. All archived audio, backup metadata, and draft episodes gone. It wasn't just a technical failure. The admin console had been overwritten with a blank login portal. When I tried to reset the password, I got a security lockout prompt, followed by a simple message: session expired. Jordan tried to remote in through a secondary shell, but found the system wiped. They didn't just crash it, he said. They rewrote it like it never existed. 2 hours after that, my laptop restarted on its own. I watched the screen go black, then flash the manufacturer logo before booting into a diagnostic screen. I hadn't triggered. My encryption key was invalid. My local files were encrypted into nonsense. A deep scan revealed remote intrusion, one of the rare ones, sophisticated, enough to leave no IP trace. That's when I looked out the window. There was a black SUV parked across the street. No logos, tinted glass. It hadn't been there the night before. I watched it through the blinds for 20 minutes. No one got out. No lights turned on. Just a silent presence, sitting there like a dare. The next day, I packed up and moved. Not far, just enough to switch zip codes, utilities, and habits. I paid cash for a room in an extended stay motel with exterior doors. I didn't turn on my real phone. I carried a burner, wiped daily. I stopped using Wi-Fi, relying instead on hardline VPN, tunneling through a hotspot device rerouted through Icelandic proxies. Paranoia wasn't an overreaction anymore. It was basic hygiene. The silence lasted 2 days. Then a new lead came through, buried in an encrypted Proton mail dropped from a burner account. The subject line said, "Check procurement docket number 1376-245A. The file attached was a scanned excerpt from a Defense Intelligence Agency memo, dated 6 months prior. It referenced anomalous artifact recovery, and noted that bioreactive signatures were consistent with materials logged under Radiant Lantern. There was a sentence that stuck out. Interface surfaces display adaptive behavior when in proximity to human bioelectric fields. That phrase, adaptive behavior, kept looping in my mind. This wasn't just hardware, it was responsive. That meant it wasn't inert. That meant someone had touched it, and something had responded. A second page contained hand-marked coordinates, centered on an unincorporated region west of the city, close to the restricted borders of Nellis AFB near the bottom. The phrase "secure, transfer initiated, private storage, level B4" was underlined. No other identifiers. I printed the documents. spread them out on the motel bed, and tried to breathe through the adrenaline. This wasn't speculation anymore. There were physical objects involved, something that had fallen, something responsive, and something Peregrine had been tasked with recovering or hiding. I needed context. That's when I thought of Alan Rice, a retired AARO analyst I'd interviewed 2 years earlier for a separate piece on UAP transparency. He picked up on the second ring. "Rachel," he said, like he'd been expecting me. "It started. Again, hasn't it?" I didn't ask how he knew. I just told him what I had. The light, the Kenmores, the glitch in the footage, the artifacts. I didn't mention the SUV or the data wipes. If he was who I thought he was, he already knew. "I can't confirm anything," he said. "But I can tell you this, when we found the first object back in '96, we didn't understand what it wanted. Only that it wasn't inert. It learned from contact. Some materials absorbed heat and redirected it. Others responded to emotional states. We never figured out how." "Where are they now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Most are gone, recovered. Some moved overseas, some buried, some integrated." Integrated into what? Asterisk, he didn't answer that. Instead, he told me to look up a now defunct company called Ultranet Systems. "Start with their defense division," he said. "They didn't make weapons, they made interfaces. Neural ones." After we hung up, I searched the name. The company had gone bankrupt in 2009, but not before selling dozens of black box patents to a handful of major contractors, Paris among them. I went back to my notes and reread something Greg Kenmore had mentioned in passing, how his son, Angel, had started drawing symbols after the encounter. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I wasn't so sure. I tracked down the local school. Angel was enrolled there, or had been. But when I called, the line went dead halfway through the secretary answering. I tried again. Voicemail. So I drove there. The office was closed. A handwritten sign said the Kenmore family had withdrawn Angel 2 days after the incident. No forwarding address, no notice, just gone. I went back to my car, sat in the lot, and stared at the empty sky. I couldn't explain why, but something in my chest ached, not from fear, but from the slow dawning sense that I'd just missed something important. Like chasing a shadow that never quite touches the ground. That night, I returned to the motel and found my backup phone vibrating under a stack of receipts. One missed call, no voicemail, just a number I didn't recognize. When I called back, it rang once, then a voice answered. "You don't know what you've stepped into," the man said, "but you're already being catalogued. If you want to survive, stop digging." The line went dead. I sat there, phone still in my hand, the dial tone humming against my ear. The pieces weren't scattered anymore. They were forming something, a shape I didn't recognize yet, but that felt disturbingly familiar. Like I'd seen it before, just out of focus. This wasn't just a mystery. It was an ecosystem, and I was now part of its food chain. The next morning, I drove out to the desert. I didn't have a specific destination. I just needed to move, to get away from anything traceable: cell towers, plate readers, neighbors with ring cameras. The silence out there felt cleaner, untouched, but it didn't help my mind slow down. If anything, it made things louder. I kept circling back to what Rice had said: responsive materials, emotional input, neural interfaces. If even a fraction of that was real, then the object in the Kenmore's backyard wasn't just alien in origin, it was alien in function. It didn't land and wait. It reacted. It learned. Maybe it even chose. I needed more than theories. I needed someone who'd been closer than Rice. Someone who had seen the tech, touched it, worked with it. So I reached out to a contact of his. I'd found years earlier while chasing leads on a decommissioned Dyer program. She'd disappeared from public view in 2017. No social accounts, no employment history. But I had a physical address she once used to receive research materials. A shack in the Nevada foothills outside Tonopah. It was a long shot, but at this point, all I had were long shots. The place was half collapsed, long abandoned. The yard was overtaken by wind-blown debris cans, wood fragments, a rusted satellite dish. No one had been there in years. But inside, I found something odd. In a box under a false floor panel were printed photos, grainy, black and white, time-stamped. Objects in isolation. Some were spherical, others more angular, like fragments of melted sculpture. All of them seemed to glow slightly, even in stills. One photo was labeled Node 4, Control Interface, Desert Fault. I scanned everything, wrapped them in aluminum foil, and left. On the drive back, I kept checking my mirrors. Not for a car, but for confirmation I wasn't alone anymore. By then, I knew I wasn't. That night, I went back to the footage. Not the body cam, the USB drop. I focused on the thermal overlays, slowing the playback and analyzing each motion. The way the figures moved wasn't just unnatural, it was synchronized, like they were responding to the same external stimulus. Then I caught something strange. Right before the final visual glitch, one of the heat signatures appeared to split duplicate, almost into two identical forms before merging again. It lasted 2 frames, less than a blink, but it was real. I exported the clip and encrypted it in a new drive. I couldn't shake the idea that the entity or object had mimicked Angel's voice or even his presence. If it could split visually, could it imprint? Could it replicate? I decided to revisit Angel's school, hoping someone might still remember something before the family vanished. The front office clerk was hesitant until I showed her a press badge and made up a story about a documentary on unexplained psychological trauma in youth. She relaxed enough to open a drawer and hand me a small stack of records. No grades, no formal transcript, but tucked into the folder was a drawing. It was done in colored pencil. A circular room, walls made of light, and in the center, what looked like a seat with wires growing from it like roots. No control panel, no windows, just a throne. The caption read, "It was already inside me." I stared at that sentence for a long time. It wasn't the kind of thing a kid makes up. It wasn't metaphor. It was a memory. I asked the clerk if she knew where the Kenmores had gone. She said no one had seen them since May. They withdrew enrollment, broke their lease, and left no contact info. But she remembered something else. Sanjel had drawn more pictures during art class. When I asked to see them, she frowned. They were picked up, she said, by 2 men in suits. Said they were with a federal trauma program, had credentials, took everything. I asked if she remembered what agency. She shook her head. Something with 3 letters. I don't remember which. Back in my car, I called Jordan. I asked him to trace the likely federal programs that would authorize the seizure of school records tied to trauma or cognitive interference. He promised to run a search through deep web contractor indexes and get back to me. While I waited, I reviewed one of the DIA documents from the earlier envelope, the one referencing biologically integrated command nodes. At the time, I hadn't understood the implications. But now, paired with Angel's drawing, it hit different. This wasn't about alien machines. This was about merging. Interfaces that didn't sit outside the body, but within it. Not just responding to a human nervous system, but bonding with it. That night, Jordan sent me a secure file transfer. Inside were 8 hits for programs active between 2008 and 2016 that dealt with cognitive modeling of non-human systems. Most had since been folded into black budget divisions, but one, flagged in red, stood out: Project Osiris V2. The subheading read, Replicative Cognition Studies, Host Pattern Retention After Exposure. There were no personnel listed, but under status, continuing, relocated, under DOE custodianship, lead contractor, Peregrine Dynamics. That word again. Replicative. I called Rice. Asked him, point blank, if the Kenmore kid could have been changed. Not possessed, not mind-controlled, changed. There was a long pause. We never confirmed sentience transfer, he said, finally. But we saw behavioral bleed. Memory shifts. Symbolic language overlap. Sometimes it went away. Sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, let's just say, those cases were reassigned. I asked where another pause, offshore, or remote containment. That night, someone tried to break into my motel room. I heard the handle jiggle, then a pause, followed by a single, deliberate knock. I didn't move. I waited 5 minutes, then looked through the peephole. No one was there, but wedged into the doorframe was a scrap of paper. All it said was, "You're not watching it. It's watching you." I checked out before sunrise. I drove 4 hours north and paid cash at a different motel no name on the registry. I used a burner to contact a journalist friend in Montana, someone who'd worked on tech leaks before and knew how to store physical backups. I shipped him a copy of everything: drawings, footage, recordings, contacts. If I went dark, I told him, wait 3 days, then publish. Before I slept, I went back one last time to the footage of Angel's drawing. I stared at the throne, the wires, the phrase. It was already inside me. I didn't know if he meant the object, or something worse, but I knew one thing with certainty now. Whatever came down that night wasn't trying to escape detection. It was trying to make contact, and maybe it already had. By the time I reached the new motel, I was running on caffeine and instinct. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. The silence inside my head had started to sound like static. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the phrase from Angel's drawing burned behind my eyelids. It was already inside me. I laid out my notes again. Dozens of files, photos, maps, and dead-end leads scattered across the bed. At the center was a single folder marked Radiant Lantern, now thick with printed documents and handwritten annotations. I had everything but direction. Every lead pulled me sideways. Peregrine, Project Osiris, the disappearances, the material behavior. None of it formed a complete picture, until I got the message. It came from a secure Proton mail address I hadn't seen before. No name, no signature. The subject line read, "For your eyes only, do not forward, do not reply." The body of the message was a single sentence. "You'll find what you're looking for here." Beneath it, a link to a secure file sharing server. I ran the file through every filter I had. No malware, no metadata, just a .zip archive containing 4.jpgs, 1.pdf, and a short video file. I opened the PDF first. It was a briefing slide government format, black header, classification stamps partially blurred. At the top, it read, Project Radiant Lantern, Incident Site Brief. The 1st of May 23 classified, eyes only, authorized access, REQIRE below, was a satellite image. The coordinates had been scrubbed, but the landscape was familiar. High desert, low brush, eroded hills. A rectangular structure, half buried in rock. The label read, Retrieval Zone Alpha 4. My pulse spiked. The structure matched one I'd seen on a contractor logistics map weeks earlier. It was listed as decommissioned government storage once, part of a mining operation, now closed off. It was just outside the Nellis perimeter. I opened the next feeler still photo. It showed the interior of a hangar. Low light, metal walls. In the center was an object the size of a small car, perfectly spherical, dark grey, almost black, with a faint iridescent sheen. It didn't sit on the floor, but hovered slightly, casting no shadow. There was a hatch on the side, partially open. Along the rim, marking circular patterns that didn't look like language, but felt too deliberate to be decoration. I clicked the video next. It opened with a burst of static, then stabilized. Handheld camera footage. The perspective was shaky, but clear. The sphere from the photo was real. As the camera approached, the ambient light shifted. The object responded. Its surface rippled faintly, as if sensing presence. When the camera reached within 2 feet, the hatch opened wider. No mechanical noise, no visible seams, just smooth motion. Inside, the space wasn't mechanical, it was organic. The walls were not metal, but something soft looking like woven. Muscle fiber, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the camera operator's movements. Light seemed to emerge from within the material itself. In the center sat a console, no buttons, no screen, just a curved structure shaped like an empty seat. As the camera approached the console, the video cut to black. I tried to replay it. The file was corrupted after the first viewing. Every copy I made failed. I tried scrubbing through the last 5 seconds, but the footage ended cleanly. No crash, no glitch, just a flat termination. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the sphere frozen in the still image. I knew what I had seen, and I knew I had to find it. I went back to the satellite image from the PDF. Even with blurred coordinates, I recognized a ridgeline. I pulled up terrain maps and compared elevations. After 2 hours of overlaying contours and matching structures, I found it. A private parcel marked as survey restricted, listed under a holding company linked to Peregrine Dynamics. I packed a field kit and drove out before dawn. The site was harder to reach than I'd expected. The road ended 5 miles short of the ridge. The last stretch was dry scrub, rocks, and wind. I parked behind a bluff and hiked in with only what I could carry. No phone, no GPS, just printed maps and a compass. I reached the ridge by late morning. The facility was mostly underground. The visible structure was small, just a rusted shed backed into a rock wall, sealed with a metal gate. A perimeter fence surrounded it, topped with fresh wire. But no signage, no warnings, no cameras that I could see. I circled the fence line and found a section warped by erosion. The posts had pulled slightly away from the rock. I slipped through and made my way to the gate. It was chained, but the lock was old and rusted. I used a crowbar to pop it loose. Inside, the air was stale and metallic. The walls were concrete. The corridor sloped downward into darkness. I used a red lens flashlight to avoid detection. As I moved deeper, I started to see signs, that the place hadn't been abandoned recently. Fresh boot prints in the dust, scuff marks near the door frames, and a faint hum coming from somewhere below at the bottom of the corridor. I found it, a large room, reinforced steel walls. In the center sat the sphere. It was exactly as I'd seen in the footage. Smooth, seamless. It didn't reflect light, exactly it warped it. The air around it shimmered faintly. As I stepped closer, the hatch opened. No sound, just movement. I stood at the threshold, heart racing. The inside was dim but visible. The same fibered texture, warm to the touch, even though I hadn't entered yet. I held up my phone to capture footage, but the screen glitched. Every attempt to record failed. Crashing, image distortion. I tried with a body-mounted camera, shielded by Faraday mesh. Same result. Interference, then blackout. I backed away slowly, not out of fear, but respect. I knew I couldn't transmit the footage directly, but I had a plan. I removed the memory card from the body cam, wrapped it in foil, and sealed it in a hidden compartment in my boot. Then I carefully exited the site the way I came. Back at my car, I checked the rearview mirror before even turning the ignition. Nothing but my phone kept. In a shielded bag, had 4 missed calls from unknown numbers. No voicemail. The calls had come while I was underground, that night, back at a safe house rented under a fake name. I tried to upload the footage. The files were gone. Both the phone and the memory card showed as blank. No corruption warning, no trace of overwritten data, just blank. Even the device logs had been wiped, but I had anticipated that before leaving the site. I'd made a second copy hidden in a low-capacity drive, embedded in the heel of my spare. Boot. I retrieved it, checked the file, still intact. I ran it on an air-gapped laptop and watched the footage again. The object, the hatch, the reaction to my presence. It was all there, and one new detail at the end of the footage, just before I'd turned away, a faint glow appeared inside the hatch, pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythm, almost like breathing or waiting. I shut the laptop and sealed the drive in a lead case. I didn't know what this object was. I didn't know who had built it or how it got here, but I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't ours, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever got close to it. I didn't sleep that night. The footage played over and over in my head, how the object's surface changed when I stepped closer, how the hatch opened without sound, and how the interior glowed at the end, as if reacting to me specifically. It didn't feel like a machine. It felt like something aware, and it wasn't designed for observation. It was meant for interaction. By morning, I had one goal: find someone who had worked directly with the object, not from a distance, not as a contractor or theorist, someone who'd been inside the program and touched it. Started scanning forums for military contractor, chatters, specifically threads discussing materials recovery, interface anomalies, and post-clearance trauma. That's where I came across a familiar name, Matthew Brown. I'd seen it before in procurement logs and project rosters tied to Perigreed Dynamics. What I hadn't known until now was that he had posted anonymously on a private forum weeks after the Kenmore event. The post was short: "You think you've seen tech? You haven't. Some things you don't build, you inherit." He hadn't posted since. Most users dismissed it as rambling, but the thread was archived, and one user had tagged a file reference that traced back to a public complaint Brown had filed after leaving Perry Gray. It had been quietly sealed, but the original intake form was still cached on a third-party server. It listed his contact information and a single-line description of the issue. Unapproved psychological exposure from experimental interface environment. I drove 3 hours north to the address listed on the form. It led me to a storage unit facility. His name was still on the lease, but the manager said Brown hadn't been seen in months. The unit was paid in full through the year. The manager looked the other way while I used a thin pry tool to pop the lock. Inside, it was dark and cold. No furniture, no boxes, just a table, a stack of notebooks, and a manual typewriter. Along one wall were dozens of Polaroids pinned to corkboard. None of them showed faces. They were all close-up smatterial textures, faint symbols, what looked like scan outputs from a thermal camera. One photo showed a diagram of the sphere's interior, annotated by hand. Another had a line of text written in red ink. Pattern memory exceeds organic latency. Integration irreversible after threshold event. Asterisk, I found a hard case tucked beneath the table. Inside were printed reports, some pages stained, others still crisp. They showed data logs from early-stage interface trials. One chart tracked EEG patterns during exposure to the object. Another showed a timeline of behavioral drift personnel experiencing memory issues, dissociative episodes, and hallucinations of recursive geometry. One document contained a hand-scrawled note: living circuits, not metaphor, self-modifying pathways, DNA receptive. The last folder contained physical evidence, thin plastic sleeves holding fragments of translucent material, along with test results and chain of custody forms. The document had a read: Sample ID, Xenobiotic Layer, Alpha, Analysis 4. Non-terrestrial origin. There were 3 test results. All showed the same line. Biological markers detected. Non-Earth isotopic ratios confirmed. Carbon dominant, but anomalous helix redundancy. I photographed everything, resealed the case, and returned it exactly as I found it. That night, I received a text from a restricted number. No introduction, just, I heard you were looking for Matthew. Meet me where the air stings. 10 a.m. Attached was a location pinned north of town, near an industrial plant that had long since shut down. I went alone, carrying only a Faraday pouch, analog recorder, and a disposable phone. He was already there when I arrived. Matthew Brown looked older than his record suggested. His skin was pale, eyes sunken. He wore a heavy coat despite the heat, and his fingers trembled slightly when he lit a cigarette. He didn't shake my hand. I don't have much time, he said. They monitor movement, not words. I asked him what he meant by living circuits. He looked past me, toward the edge of the lot. The object isn't mechanical, it's reactive. It learns shape and intention. The materials inside metallic at first start to change after contact. They follow thought. We mapped response. Patterns, the things, not a vehicle. It's a container for will. Whose will, I asked. Doesn't matter. Once you sync with it, it stops being theirs, becomes yours. Or maybe you become part of it. He handed me a small data stick, sealed in foil. They know what you're doing, but they're not all unified. There are splits. Some want to release the truth. Others think it's a virus. Not biological, cognitive. I asked him why he left. He looked at me with something like guilt. I stayed too long. The dreams got worse. I started seeing blue light behind my eyes even when I was awake. I wrote down things I couldn't understand. They called it burn-in exposure, memory leakage. Said it would pass. It didn't. I asked him about the tissue samples. He nodded. Tissue wasn't human, or not entirely. Hybrid, maybe. The DNA had redundant strands like backups. You damage one, another activates. That's not evolution, that's design. He stood to leave. Whatever you do, protect that footage. The real footage. They'll crash everything else. He walked away without another word. I didn't follow. That night, I checked the data stick. Inside were schematics, technical diagrams for interface components recovered from the sphere. Most were incomplete, but one file showed a neural map synapse pathways overlaid with control signal patterns. The source material wasn't machine code. It was human brainwave data, layered into a grid like an operating system. The notes called it a biosynthetic bridge. The implications hit hard. The object wasn't just compatible with human thought, it had been modified to accept it. Or worse, it had modified us. The next day, I tried to contact Matthew again. No answer. His phone number went dead. His message account was deactivated. The storage unit was cleared out. The Polaroids, the notes, the samples gone. I called the facility manager. He said 2 men had come with a signed release order and removed everything within 30 minutes. One of them wore a pedigree badge. I checked local footage. The cameras had been disabled. Then I found something taped to my motel door when I returned. A Polaroid, just like the ones Matthew had pinned to the wall. But this one was blank. For a single phrase written across the bottom. Pattern replication successful. Phase 2 active. For the first time since this started, I hesitated to open my laptop, because I wasn't sure anymore if I was tracing the conspiracy or if I'd already become part of it. In the days after Matthew vanished, I noticed something strange. Not silence, but saturation. The internet filled with new sightings, blurry videos, dubious claims, TikTok influencers claiming alien dreams, satellite footage of lights over cornfields, dramatic witness testimonies with no details, no times, all different stories, yet oddly uniform in structure. Same pacing, same keywords, same perfectly timed releases. It wasn't organic. I ran keyword analytics across trending content. The phrase glowing spheres jumped 800% in 4 days. Biological interface craft trended across 3 platforms, simultaneously Reddit, X, and YouTube. Then I traced those posts back to their sources. What I found disturbed me. A web of accounts created in the last 6 months, all with eerily similar posting patterns. Different names, different locations, but identical phrasing in captions. Same video editing templates, same deepfake style. The content was meant to overwhelm, not inform. At first, I thought it was just copycat content. Then Jordan messaged me, "These accounts aren't bots, they're human managed, but centrally coordinated." I tracked image hosting to a shell company in Virginia. Want to guess who it's tied to? I didn't need to. Pedigree. Indirectly, he said. The hosting provider is owned by a media group that shares an address with the defense public. Affairs subcontractor. Same suite as a firm listed in Pedigree's vendor ledger. You're not being silenced. You're being buried. It made sense. If people heard the truth, the system didn't need to delete it. It just needed to drown it. I checked echo signals, old social channels. My own accounts had been overrun, comments disabled. New followers in the thousands, all fake. I hadn't posted in weeks, but the content queue kept refreshing, fed by AI-generated audio mimicking my voice. They'd cloned me. The show still updated, But with episodes I never recorded bland speculation, recycled footage, clips about ancient aliens, starseeds, crop circles. Nothing about Radiant Lantern, nothing real. Jordan confirmed the source. They lifted your voice model from early episodes, spliced it. You've been hijacked. I stared at the screen for a long time. It felt worse than being silenced. They hadn't erased me. They had replaced me. The same strategy was working on a broader scale. Real stories were being pumped full of noise. Every time someone posted footage that matched the sphere or interface details, a dozen lookalikes appeared within hours. Some were obviously fake, poor CGI looped animations. Others were believable but inconsistent. Different location, metadata, contradictory time zones. It was impossible to track which ones were legitimate. This wasn't damage control. It was an active disinformation campaign. I shifted tactics. Instead of uploading, I started mailing encrypted drives, physical media, hidden in everyday packaging. One went to a journalist in Toronto, another to an old contact at a European science journal. I didn't expect them to publish. I just needed redundancy. Then something strange happened. I got a reply. A researcher in Prague sent me a file in response to the footage I'd mailed. She didn't analyze it. She translated it inside the signal from the sphere. She found rhythm patterns that matched linguistic markers, specifically early Sumerian syntax structures. Not a translation, but a shape. A pattern of repetition that mirrored primitive subject-verb-object ordering. She called it intention-based sequence modeling. Her theory: the signal wasn't a message. It was an imprint, a cognitive architecture, meant to prepare the brain for new information by mimicking ancient structure. It bypassed modern language. It was designed to feel familiar, not to be understood. I asked her if it could affect memory. Not directly, she said, but it could alter how memory is accessed. If the brain recognizes a pattern as language even, without meaning it, prioritizes recall around it. That's how propaganda works. It's also how trauma forms anchors. I thanked her, then I burned the phone I used to call her. 2 nights later, I was watching a live stream from a popular UFO truth channel. The host, someone who had never covered real researchers, suddenly produced documents labeled Radiant Lantern. He waved them on camera, but when he read from them, it was all nonsense. Claims about time travel, portals, reptilian hybrids. He laughed, called it mind control light bulbs. I recognized the stamp. It was a distorted copy of one of my real slides, altered just enough to discredit the whole set. They weren't just flooding the zone with noise. They were taking the real signal and wrapping it in fiction. The next day, my backup drive went missing. I had hidden it inside the lining of my car door, wrapped in anti-static bags and camouflaged among repair tools. No forced entry, nothing stolen, just the drive removed cleanly. I confronted the motel manager. He denied knowledge, but someone had keyed a symbol into the back of my rearview mirror. A circle with 3 short lines radiating outward. I'd seen it before on one of the thermal overlays from the object. The message was clear. They didn't need to threaten me anymore. They could reach anything I touched. I moved again. I switched to burner tech, analog notebooks, coded language. I stopped emailing Jordan. We used dead drops, cached messages embedded in fake URLs, updated daily through a rotation of proxy sites. That's how I found the connection. One message contained IP logs from social media accounts linked to the distraction campaign. Most of them led nowhere. but a cluster of uploads from 1 week showed identical IP hops through a subcontractor office in Arlington, Virginia. The company, Yarrow Field Systems, a tiny firm with no public presence, no website, no product, but one government listing showed them as a subcontractor for data environment modulation, a term used in psychological operations contracts. Further digging revealed that Yarrow was founded by a former Peregrine employee, same last name as one of the analysts listed on Matthew's EEG documents. I followed the thread deeper. Yarrow had received 5 funding rounds in the last 2 years, all from firms tied to media infrastructure, video hosting, content moderation, ad platforms. It was a self-contained loop. They made the noise, boosted it, and controlled the filters. They weren't hiding the object. They were rewriting the narrative in real time. I uploaded a redacted version of my footage to a dark web archive, embedded with ASHA-256 integrity hash. I added a brief summary and instructions for verification. No call to action, no interpretation. Just evidence. Within 24 hours, the video was reposted with added lens flares, distorted audio, and a synthesized alien voice overlaid. My original hash was removed. The fake version had millions of views. Mine had barely 100. I got a call that night from a restricted number. A man's voice, calm, measured. "We don't need to stop you, Rachel. We just need to keep you surrounded." He hung up before I could answer. I sat alone, light from the screen flickering across the wall. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I was up against. Not a cover-up, not a shadow agency, but a coordinated ecosystem designed to replicate faster than truth could travel. A system that didn't erase the truth, it poisoned it. I was running out of present-day leads. Every thread I pulled had already been spliced, cloned, or buried beneath. Noise, nothing stayed clean. Nothing remained untouched. It felt like I was tracing shadows in a room of mirrors. So I changed direction. Instead of following what was happening now, I started digging into when it started. It was Matthew who'd pointed me toward the past. One of his notes had referenced legacy containment protocols and something called keyhole. I'd seen it mentioned once before in a heavily redacted Pentagon budget annex from 2005. I'd dismissed it then as code language for satellite programs. Now I wasn't so sure. I reached out to a historian I trusted, Anton Vesovy, an eccentric academic who'd spent most of his career researching unconventional military history, black programs, unsanctioned treaties, hidden alliances. He was one of the few people I knew who could trace classified breadcrumbs across continents and decades. He agreed to meet at a university archive in Milan, where he had access to declassified Italian wartime documents. I booked the flight under a false name and used a secure courier to transport the core documents. I had collected. Anton met me in the back room of the archive, wearing a faded blazer and holding a coffee like it was a weapon against the cold. He listened as I told him everything, starting with the Kenmores, ending with the fake videos and the sphere. When I mentioned the phrase keyhole, he stopped me. "You know what that means, don't you?" he said. In old NATO intelligence parlance, a keyhole wasn't just a vantage point. It was a compartment, something only a few people had the code to open. Then he handed me a folder. Inside were translations of documents recovered from post-World War II Italian military archives. One, dated June 1933, described an aircraft crash in northern Italy, near magenta. The language was vague, intentionally so. Terms like unusual materials and metal of unknown origin were used. The recovery was handled by a secretive branch under Mussolini's direction, called RS-33. The documents made no specific claims about what the object was, only that it was stored in a facility near Lake Maggiore until 1945. Then came the handover. According to a letter Anton found, the United States took custody of the materials in exchange for military aid and diplomatic protections. The exchange took place quietly after the war ended, under the oversight of an unnamed US intelligence operation with post-war authority in Europe. This is the origin, Anton said. Before Roswell, before everything, your object may not be the first. It may be part of a long chain, one that started with this. The more I read, the more familiar it felt. Descriptions of seamless metal, no rivets, no signs of construction, interior shapes that did not conform to human proportions, even a reference to light that moves independent of its source. One document mentioned an engineer assigned to examine the structure's composition. He'd gone blind in one eye after exposure, despite there being no visible radiation. Another developed insomnia and claimed to hear low-frequency tones when near the object. That detail struck me. It matched what Matthew had described. It matched what I'd experienced in the facility outside Nilister. Pressure in the air. The shift in sound. Anton pulled out one last file. It was labeled Majestic Reference, US Transfer, 1947. No official letterhead, but stamped with a symbol, a triangle intersected by a single vertical line. Inside were references to Operation Keyhole, a US-led initiative to retrieve, study, and suppress anomalous airframes from Allied nations. It wasn't a myth, it was logistics. I asked Anton if any of the material had ever resurfaced. He nodded. Some ended up in US labs. Others, it seems, were not recovered in full. There's speculation that at least one object was moved independently, outside of military oversight. Hidden again. That night, I reviewed the documents in my hotel room. I ran comparisons between the 1933 incident and the Las Vegas case. The similarities weren't just structural, they were procedural. The same behaviors, the same suppression strategies, discredit, distract, delay. I couldn't shake one thought. If this started in 1933 or earlier, then how many people had seen these objects? How many had tried to speak up? How many were rewritten or erased? On my last day in Milan, Anton took me to a private archive below the university library. There, stored among war relics and intelligence memos, was a sketch. It showed an oval object suspended above a dry lake bed. In the foreground stood two men in long coats, facing it. One of them had a note beside his head. Observer reports. Persistent hum. Beneath the sketch was a faint pencil mark. MK4, Keyhole Alpha. I took a photo. Anton looked at me with the kind of sadness you see in people who've been close to the truth too long. This is bigger than retrieval, he said. It's about control. Whoever holds the objects holds the narrative. And right now, they're rewriting it faster than you can tell it. When I returned to the States, I landed under a different identity and switched gear locations again. I stored the translated files in 3 separate dead drop locations, 1 analog, 2 digital LAN, encrypted everything with new ciphers. The longer this went on, the more I realized this wasn't about leaking information. It was about surviving. Long enough to assemble a picture, to complete, to dismiss. Then, back at the motel, I received a package. No return address, no postage, just a padded envelope with a flash drive inside and a single word on the label, cognate. I ran it through my offline machine. The folder contained 5 video files, grainy surveillance clips, all time-stamped between 2018 and 2022. Each showed a different object, different sizes, but all with similar behavior. No visible propulsion, no engine noise, just motion, hovering, observation. In one clip, the object reoriented itself toward a human figure without movement. In another, the recording device cut out just before contact. The last video was from an underground hangar. The object there wasn't just present, it was open, and inside, something moved. Not a person, not a machine, just motion, as if the shape itself had changed. Accompanying the videos was a folder of memos. They referenced biological resonance, thresholds, and cognate synchronization failures. One note stood out: host assimilation incomplete. Behavioral drift may lead to exposure. And then it clicked. The story I was chasing wasn't just about the objects or the cover-up. It was about what came next, about the after effects, about what happens to those exposed. Angel, Matthew, the observers in Italy, and maybe even me. What if the real danger wasn't the object? What if the real danger was contact? And what if that contact didn't end when the object was taken away? I left Milan with a gnawing sense that something irreversible had started. The further back I traced the thread, the more it became clear that the cover-up wasn't only about the objects. It was about those who encountered them, and how they changed. That idea followed me like a shadow. Angel, Matthew, maybe even me. Back in the States, I avoided major airports. I crossed the border through a quiet checkpoint in Vermont and made my way west by rental car. No phones, no digital maps. I kept everything analog. The less signal I gave off, the better. The flash drive labeled cognate remained in a lead-lined case under my seat. I didn't touch it unless the laptop was shielded. By the third day of travel, I was exhausted. I checked into a basement-level motel room outside Denver, paid cash, and wedged a chair under the doorknob. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall, trying to convince myself that everything I'd seen could still be separated from me. That exposure didn't mean infection. I woke at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of metal scraping. At first, I thought it was in my head, another phantom echo from too many nights without rest. But the sound came again, more deliberate, a long, low drag against the outside of the door. I slipped out of bed and moved silently to the peephole. The hallway was dark, no movement. I pressed my ear to the door and held my breath. 3 slow knocks, not pounding, not aggressive, just precise. Measured. I didn't respond. I backed into the bathroom and locked the door, even though I knew it wouldn't matter if someone really wanted in. I waited, counting seconds. After a few minutes, silence returned. When I opened the door again, the hallway was empty, but something had been left. A manila envelope taped to the base of the door. Inside was a printed image, black and white, low resolution. It showed me, standing outside the archive in Milan, date and time-stamped from 2 days prior. I hadn't seen a camera. There were no obvious lenses. The angle was elevated, possibly from a rooftop or long-range lens. On the back of the photo was a single line, written in red ink: proximity alters cognition. Continued exposure increases alignment. I flushed the photo and scrubbed every surface of the room. I left within 10 minutes. That morning, I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Former CIA, now private sector. We'd met during an investigation into illegal biometric tracking programs. He owed me a favor. I didn't tell him everything, just that I needed a clean space, no surveillance, and a second set of eyes on something sensitive. He agreed to meet in a parking garage in Albuquerque, mid-level, near a stairwell with no working cameras. I arrived just after sunset. His name was Ken, late 40s, sharp, unreadable. He checked my rental for trackers before speaking. "You're lit up," he said. "You've pinged 4 systems in the last 72 hours. They're not tracking your location. They're watching movement searches, license plate intersections, gas purchases. Someone knows your route." I showed him the drive. He didn't touch it. "Tell me what's on it." I summarized everything: radiant lantern, perigee, the biological resonance signals, the footage of the object, the Milan documents. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he lit a cigarette and stared at the wall for a long time. "There's a name we used to hear in the early 2000s, he said. "Mirage, not a Project Han umbrella program. Unofficial, compartmented, allegedly tied to tech that bent light and field perception. Not optics. Holographic camouflage. Projections so convincing, even infrared couldn't tell the difference." I asked him if it was connected to the objects. "No idea," he said. "But the rumors always started the same way, after something was recovered. Something that didn't behave like anything we could build. The stories said the tech wasn't reverse engineered. It was adapted, meant for neural projection, but people started having side effects. Memory drift, perceptual bleed, seeing things that weren't there, or worse, seeing things that were." I asked him if it could make someone feel watched even when they weren't. He nodded. "Or make them watched without ever being seen." He told me to dump the drive. Said it didn't matter how careful I was. The act of possession was enough. These systems didn't rely on content. They mapped patterns. If I had it, and I believed it, I was already a node in the network. Before we parted, he gave me a new lead, a name, someone retired. Military intelligence. Had spoken off record once about a containment breach. I asked what kind of breach. "Cognitive," Ken said. "Ideas leaking. Behaviors mimicked." That word again, mimicry. I drove for hours afterward, afraid to stop. Every rest area felt compromised. Every roadside diner a potential ambush. I kept the drive hidden and checked each motel for surveillance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not watched from the outside. Watched from within, like the signal had left something behind. The next morning, I noticed something else. My voice recorder, normally kept powered off, was on. The light blinked slowly. I checked the playback. There were hours of static, but buried inside was a sequence. A low pulse, spaced evenly. I ran it through spectral analysis. The waveform matched the tone embedded in the sphere footage. Same frequency range, same rhythm. It was identical to what the Prague researcher had called the linguistic primer, the intention structure. I hadn't recorded it. It had recorded itself. I destroyed the recorder. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment since the Kenmores. Every piece of evidence, every person who had vanished, every phrase that seemed to echo back at me months later. Matthew's drawings, Angel's note. The phrase on the photo, continued exposure increases alignment. Alignment to what? I got my answer the next day. Another envelope. No return address. Just a flash drive and a printed image. This time, the image showed Angel. Older than when I'd last seen him. His face more angular, more focused. He stood in front of what looked like a white wall, holding a piece of paper with the date. Last week, the note beneath the image read, "He remembers everything." But it's not all his. I didn't sleep again that night. I made preparations, burned old notebooks, wiped backup drives, rerouted future correspondence through trusted proxies. I knew the threshold was close. I could feel it. Something in my head shifted when I looked at the footage. Something familiar. Something that didn't come from me. I don't know what the object left behind, but it's changing the way I see. And if it can change perception, it can change belief. And if it can change belief, it can change reality. I received the coordinates through a burner message routed through 5 proxy servers. The location pointed to a desert town in Nevada. Not a ghost town, exactly, but close. Population under 30, 1 gas station, no police. A place no one would look twice at, even if they drove through it. I arrived just before sunset, parked in the back lot of a boarded-up diner, and waited. The air buzzed with heat and dust. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I'd been off-grid for 2 weeks, relying on dead drops, face-to-face meetings, and physical keys. I didn't carry the original footage anymore, only the verified hash, stored on a strip of paper hidden inside a library book I'd swapped the day before. I'd learned not to keep too much in one place, especially not in my head. At 7:04 p.m., a grey pickup truck rolled into the lot. An older man stepped out. Late 60s, clean-cut, heavy frame, eyes sharp but heavy with caution. His movements were slow, deliberate, like someone used to reading every angle of a room. He nodded once, no words, and motioned for me to follow. We drove a half-mile down a dirt road and stopped at a small cinder-block building with no signs. The door was unmarked, and the inside looked like an old service station, bare walls, a fold-out table, 2 chairs. No electronics, no phones. He gestured for me to sit. Then he locked the door behind us and sat across from me. "I'm not giving you my name," he said. "But I did 32 years. Strategic command, joint operations, the kind of work where you're not allowed to think about what you're doing, just that it gets done." His voice was calm. "Even, I don't know everything," he continued. "No one does. That's the point. They compartmentalize, isolate. You see a piece, but never the whole. You think you're part of the engine, but you're just a cog in the box they've built to keep it running." I asked him how he found me. He smiled faintly. "You've been making ripples for months. We monitor signal drift, unusual packet behavior, frequency anomalies, method upper mismatches. You're not the first, but you're the first who's gotten this far without being neutralized or absorbed." Absorbed, that word stopped me. "You mean recruited?" I asked. "No," he said. "I mean absorbed." I waited. He leaned back, took a breath, and began again. "There are multiple craft, more than anyone publicly admits. Most of what people call UFOs are decoys, deliberate plants, plasma illusions, high-altitude mirages. But a few, maybe 6, maybe 7 are real. Objects recovered, studied, kept moving to stay ahead of leaks. The one in Nevada wasn't the first, and it won't be the last." He reached into a folder and pulled out a printed photo. It was grainy, but familiar. The sphere, hatch open. Same configuration I'd seen. We call that one sigma asset. 3. It's been held in rotation since 1997. Originally found near an old missile range. No crash, just there one morning, embedded in the sand like it had been placed, not fallen. No marks, no entry. I asked him how it worked. We don't know, he said. We can't open it. But people who get close, some of them change. Not physically, mentally. They begin to see patterns, feel rhythms. Some describe it like music without sound. Others dream in geometry. A few, like your technician, Brown, starts drawing structures that don't exist yet. He paused. Then come the personality shifts. Memories that don't belong. To them, language fragments. A growing sense that they're not alone in their own heads. I told him about Angel. He nodded slowly. That fits. Adolescents seem more susceptible. Neural plasticity. The brain is still forming. It doesn't resist, just integrates. What is it? I asked. A machine. He shook his head. It's not built like anything we understand. No welds, no screws, no propulsion. We think it's biological, at the core grown, not assembled. It might be a craft, or a container, or something more abstract. The best guess we had was that it's a vehicle for cognition, a transport system for thought itself. I stared at him, trying to process it. You're saying it doesn't carry a crew. It carries ideas, not ideas. Intention, he said, but not all at once. Not directly. Think of it like seeds. The object doesn't speak. It doesn't give commands. It imprints. It nudges. Once exposed, the mind begins forming new connections. Those connections guide behavior, slowly, subtly. Most people never know it's happening. They think they're becoming more aware, more enlightened. But it's alignment, pattern integration. And what's the end goal? I asked. He didn't answer right away. We don't know, he said finally. But we do know this. Those who stay too long near the object either disappear or become convinced that what it wants is good, that it's helping. Helping what? Not us, he said, helping itself. I sat in silence. It wasn't fear I felt, not exactly. It was a quiet, growing clarity, like standing in a room where the lights had been off for too long, and your eyes finally begin to adjust. You said I wasn't the first, I said. No, he replied. There have been others, journalists, scientists, even soldiers. People who made contact, learned too much, saw behind the curtain. Most of them are gone now. Some were taken off-grid, others just vanished. He reached into the folder again and handed me a small memory stick. This has logs, witness statements, old research files, some confirmed, some not. You'll find references to mirage, keyhole, and something called phase, integrity drift. That's what we think happens when a person's cognition shifts so far from their baseline that they no longer qualify as autonomous. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't want it. He stood up and walked toward the door. I'm not doing this for disclosure. I'm doing it because I believe we passed the point of containment years ago. The object isn't waiting, it's adapting. The people trying to control it don't realize they're being shaped by it. He opened the door, then paused. Just remember this, they walk among us, but not like you think. Not aliens wearing skin, not imposters, people, friends, children, changed slowly, quietly, until one day they just aren't entirely themselves anymore. He left without saying goodbye. I waited 10 minutes before leaving the building. The lot was empty. The sun had dipped below the hills. The air felt still. I sat in the car, staring at the stick in my hand, unsure whether I'd just been handed the truth, or invited deeper into the lie. But the part that stuck with me most wasn't the data. It was the phrase, "They walk among us." But not like you think, not invaders, not impulse, flexions. The package arrived without warning. No return address, no tracking code, just a thin padded envelope postmarked from a town in Utah. Angel Kenmore's last known location. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My name wasn't written anywhere on the outside, but I knew it was meant for me. Inside were 3 things: a stack of folded sketches, a leather-bound journal, and a flash drive sealed in plastic. I laid them out on the motel bed and locked the door behind me. There was no note, no explanation, but I knew what I was holding. This was everything Angel had left behind before disappearing. The sketches were first. At least 24 of them, done in pencil, some lightly colored. At first glance, they looked like abstract art webs of circles and angles, glowing arcs, latticework diagrams that spiraled inward toward central nodes. But a few were unmistakable. One showed the sphere, perfectly proportioned, hatch open, interior glowing faintly. Another sketch showed a control panel, something like one etched with symbols. I recognized from the sphere footage I'd tried and failed to upload. Angel had drawn it from memory. No hesitation, no erasures. The perspective suggested he hadn't just seen the object, he'd been inside it. I kept flipping until I found the portrait. A face, tall, elongated, smooth skin, large black eyes with a faint internal glow. Not monstrous, not alien in the horror movie sense, just other, deliberate, intelligent. It was drawn with care, not fear. And underneath, Angel had written something that sent a chill through me. I see me inside it. I opened the journal next. Its pages were dated sporadically, some entries fully formed, others fragmented thoughts. The earliest pages were about the night in Las Vegas, the light, the presence in the yard, the way his brother had frozen and couldn't speak. Angel described the being as calm and curious, not threatening. He wrote that he heard a tone in his head, like a sustained note that shaped his thoughts. Then the entries shifted. He began describing dreams where he stood inside a vast chamber with no edges, where walls shifted when he focused on them. He talked about remembering things I never learned and knowing shapes I've never seen. Some entries were equations notations that resembled organic chemistry but written in mirrored script. One sentence repeated across 3 pages. It showed me how to feel my own shape from the outside. By the end, the handwriting had changed. Not messy or unrecognizable, but more mechanical, more measured, almost printed. The language shifted to less emotional, more structural, as if the thoughts weren't filtered through a teenage mind anymore, as if something else had taken over the framing of the words. I turned to the last page. It was blank, except for a line of numbers coordinates. I opened the flash drive in a secure offline environment. There were 2 files, a simulation model labeled interior_map 3ds, and a video file simply titled recording_1. The model was stunning. A full 3D rendering of the sphere's interior, complete with energy pathways, textured surfaces, and central interface zones. Whoever created it had done so with intimate knowledge. This wasn't guesswork. The precision in the layout, the angles, the gradients. The illumination sources all matched what I'd briefly seen inside the real sphere weeks earlier. I hadn't recorded much before the footage was corrupted, but Angel had rendered what I saw, and more. I played the video. At first it showed a static image of the interior from the model. Then the camera shifted slightly. It wasn't a screen recording. It was filmed inside something. The walls glowed faintly, pulsing with light. No voices, no motion. Just the quiet hum I'd felt rather than heard at the crash site. Then the lens turned slowly toward a central column. The glow intensified. A figure appeared in the reflection. It was Angel, but not as I remembered him. He stood taller, his posture straighter, his expression blank, focused, his eyes faintly luminous. He didn't speak. He just stared into the camera, then tilted his head slightly, like listening to something just beyond the range of human hearing. The video ended abruptly. I sat there, stunned. It wasn't just evidence that he'd been inside. It was proof he had integrated with it, or it with him. The sketches, the journal, the video, they all pointed to the same truth. Angel hadn't imagined anything. He hadn't been mistaken. He'd been changed. The idea terrified me more than anything I'd learnt so far, not because it confirmed the conspiracy, but because it complicated it. The object wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just something to be reverse engineered or hidden. It was a catalyst. An Angel was a prototype outcome. Not in the sense of a failed experiment, but as a signal preview, a proof of concept. Something sent forward to demonstrate what contact looks like when it doesn't destroy but integrates. It wasn't invasion, it was replication. And Angel's transformation hadn't happened in a lab. It had started in a backyard, under the same sky we all share. That night, I couldn't shake one idea from my mind. What if the object wasn't trying to communicate in our language because it didn't have to? What if it already had, through Angel, through the thoughts it shaped in him, the drawings, the changes in speech, the altered memory, the cognitive imprint? All it needed was access. And what if I was next? I thought about the signals I'd picked up, the sound from the recorder that shouldn't have been there, the repeating rhythms, the phrase from the general, "They walk among us, but not like you think." Now I understood, not invaders from the outside, but reflections reshaped from the inside. I secured the materials in a courier, dropped the next morning, and mailed duplicates to my 3 most trusted contacts. Then I burned the original flash drive. I couldn't risk holding onto it. Every time I engaged with the data, I felt the same pull and awareness that I wasn't entirely in control of the lens anymore. That somehow I was being shaped by the very story I was trying to uncover. And yet I couldn't stop. Angel had left a final clue. The coordinates from the last page of his journal. They pointed to a location in the Nevada desert, miles from any known installation. No name, no road access. Just a dry lake bed on satellite view. Nothing there, but the signal in me said otherwise. I arrived in DC under another new identity. By now, the layers I'd built between myself and the public record were less about protection and more about delay. If they were looking for me, and I assumed their work would take longer each time, that was all I could ask for. Time. Enough to pass along what I knew before the story was buried again. The invitation came from someone I'd only ever spoken to through encrypted threads, working under a senator I'd tangled with before. Adrian Klein. The aide never gave me a name, just a time, a building, and a promise. Closed-door congressional testimony was happening, and I'd want to see it. The hearing was held in a soundproof, windowless chamber in the Capitol complex. the kind designed for classified briefings and intelligence reviews. I wasn't allowed inside not officially, but the aide met me afterward in a parking garage across town. She handed me a manila folder and a flash drive, then leaned close and whispered. They already knew everything before the first word was spoken. This wasn't an inquiry, it was a rehearsal. I asked her what she meant. Testing which facts they can publicly deny while keeping a straight face, she said. It's not about getting to the truth. It's about preparing for when they're forced to acknowledge parts of it. Then she left. No name, no contact. I opened the folder that night in a dim motel room outside the city. Inside were transcripts typed, not scanned, and pages marked unverified exempted testimony. The names listed confirmed what I feared. David Grush, 2 former intelligence analysts, a military liaison whose name had appeared in the keyhole files Anton had shown me. And all of them said the same thing. The US government has had access to non-human technology for decades. The testimonies varied in tone. Some were measured, focused on technical descriptions, materials with isotopic ratios never found on Earth, internal structures that defied metallurgy, artifacts that reacted to thought in controlled conditions. Others were more cautious, describing only anomalous constructs or adaptive systems beyond known propulsion logic, but all pointed toward the same conclusion. We had not only recovered objects, we had studied them, we had hidden them, and in some cases, we had deployed their derivative technology under the cover of national security. One testimony stood out. A former operations director from the Defense Intelligence Agency described a protocol known as Radiant Lantern, matching the label on the corrupted slides Matthew had leaked. It wasn't a research program. It was a containment framework, not to contain the objects, but the effects of contact. The transcript read, "The greatest risk was never the technology itself. It was the neurocognitive contagion, the way exposure led to adaptive behavior, changes untraceable at first, but eventually subjects began to show alignment in thought, language, and instinct, not because they were coerced, but because they started to identify with something they couldn't explain." He was describing what had happened to Angel, what had started to happen to Matthew, and possibly what was beginning to happen to me. I skimmed through the budget summary. A single line item under Defense Research and Development had been blacked out entirely. Its reference code matched Radiant Lantern. There was no description, no funding trail, just an empty space where accountability should have been. That was the part that chilled me the most. Not the alien craft, not the biological interfaces, but the silence in the record. A vacuum so complete it had been planned as a failure of oversight, but as a feature of the system. The flash drive was labeled Archive 12R. Inside were audio excerpts from the hearing. I plugged in a clean device and listened with headphones in the dark. The voices were calm, controlled. No hysteria, just men and women speaking about impossible things in the same tone you'd use to approve a highway project. One clip caught my attention. A senator voice, unlisted, asked a simple question. If we've recovered multiple objects, why hasn't the public seen proof? Grush responded, voice steady. Because proof doesn't look like what people expect. It's not ships and pilots, it's systems, biological hardware, thought-encoded residue, interfaces that alter cognition rather than perform tasks. We've been looking for engines, but we were given mirrors. That line stuck with me. We were given mirrors. It echoed what the general had told me, what Angel's journal had hinted at. The object didn't teach, It reflected, it didn't command. It aligned, and alignment didn't always mean understanding. I called the aide from a new burner line. She answered immediately. "They'll start public hearings in 2 months," she said. "Controlled leaks, limited evidence, all meant to make it seem like they're being transparent. But none of the real files will be named. Radiant Lantern will be written out of the record." "Why tell me?" I asked. "Because the more you know," she said quietly, "the more you become a liability. And that means they'll move on. You soon, if you're going to release what you have, do it now, before the window closes. What happens after that? They stop pretending you're a journalist and start treating you like a carrier." Her words echoed in my head for hours. Carrier, not a reporter, not a threat, a carrier. As if the information wasn't just dangerous, it was TRANSSIBL. It made sense. Everything in Angel's drawings, the flash drive recordings, the symbols, embedded in the neural simulation files. They weren't messages. They were vessels, triggers, and maybe even the people exposed to them. The ones who understood the patterns, who dreamed in them, became transmission nodes. I packed my gear and left DC before dawn. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, but the image had already formed in my mind. If I didn't speak now, someone else would. Not with the same facts, but with distorted pieces. The noise was coming again. I'd seen how they flooded the space, how they prepared the narrative. And I knew the next wave would be worse. It wouldn't erase the truth. It would mutate it into myth, fantasy, and distraction. The only thing that might cut through was evidence tied to people, Angel, Matthew, me. I stopped in a small town halfway across the country and set up a mobile signal kit. No Wi-Fi, no cell tower, just satellite bounce and signal rebroadcast. I loaded the cleanest version of the interior model and cross-verified it against the visual references in the hearing transcript. Everything matched. Then I compiled a package, a full report, every sketch, every decrypted signal file, every segment of corrupted video matched against independent verification logs. I embedded them with visual timestamps, geolocation data, and hash integrity proof. I scheduled the release for livestream midnight Eastern, but somewhere in me, I already knew what would happen. They wouldn't stop the transmission, they would discredit it before it ever began. The feed was scheduled for midnight. I'd chosen the time for a reason: low bandwidth contention, peak late night engagement, and a psychological association with confession. People trust things whispered in the dark more than declarations in daylight. I triple-checked every file, every timestamp, every encryption key. I used 3 isolated machines, mirrored across 2 air-gapped systems. The packet was clean. The hashes matched. The metadata bore no contamination. It was ready. At 11:56 p.m., the uplink froze. Not a crash, not a hardware failure, just stopped. Every device went black. All backups, redundant systems failed in perfect sync. Not corrupted blank. No error messages. No recovery protocol. Just zeroed out drives. Logs gone. Boot sectors missing. I sat in stunned silence. My hand reached automatically for the secondary tripter. Hardware-based upload housed inside a modified battery bank. It connected directly to the satellite relay, bypassing local internet nodes. I activated it. Nothing that the screen displayed one line of text. The truth cannot be hosted. I stood up, pacing the room, adrenaline spiking. Every possible angle ran through my mind. electromagnetic sabotage, signal hijacking, AI-layered censorship systems. Each theory only made it worse. None of this was supposed to be possible without someone physically nearby. But I hadn't seen anyone. No strange cars. No clicks on the line. I'd kept my pattern clean. Then the email arrived. Time-stamped 1201 A.M. No sender. No subject. Just a single attachment. designs_final.pdf. And a line in the body of the email. Legacy breaches are recursive. See page 14. I opened the file on a fresh, isolated device with no external access. It contained 43 pages of technical diagrams, blueprints, but not mechanical blueprints. These were structural layouts for something more abstract, modular, architecture shaped like neural clusters, lattice spiraling in self-similar forms. Each segment contained embedded notes, energy thresholds, resonance, conditions, signal triggers. It looked like an instruction manual for something halfway between a brain and a machine. Page 14 stopped me cold. It showed a diagram. I recognized the sphere's interior interface, exactly as Angel had drawn it, exactly as Matthew had rendered. In simulation, only now, annotated in fluent technical English machine, readable callouts detailing parts of the system we'd guessed at for months. The diagram wasn't speculative. It was authored. Someone had built this document from first-hand access, and at the bottom of the page, in a red box, was the phrase, Phase Persistence, Cognitive Residue Transfer Model, V3, 1 Januski. Protocol. I knew that name. I'd seen it once before. A burner account at Januski that had dropped fragments of the propulsion specs Angel's files partially matched. But it had gone silent weeks ago. I assumed it had been compromised or neutralized. But now I saw the truth. Januski hadn't been eliminated. It had gone internal. I ran the design specs through 3 verification engines used by defense tech analysts. The verdicts were mixed. One flagged the file as synthetic disinformation. Another listed it as theoretical architecture matching high-end neuroadaptive models. The third flagged it as classified derivative, but none called it fake. I uploaded a query to an independent physicist I'd trusted for years. No context, no explanation, just the core technical readout. She responded within minutes. If this is real, it's 40 years beyond anything we've seen, and if it's not real, then it was written by someone who understands how thought could interface with form, which scares me more. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The file wasn't just evidence. It was a puzzle designed to trigger thought alignment in the reader. That's why I'd been warned. That's why it had been delivered after my systems failed. The broadcast wasn't the point anymore. The distribution was the signal. I sat back and thought about everything that had happened since Las Vegas. Angel, Matthew, the footage, the glitched body cam, the congressional testimony. Every piece pointed not toward disclosure, but toward something more subtle. Adaptation, a long-term process, not of invasion, but of recursive thought integration. The object didn't just exist. It propagated itself through information, through sketches, symbols, music, sound. The beings, if that's even the right word, weren't arriving. They were emerging, step by step, inside the human frame. That's why the broadcasts failed. Why videos glitched. Why witnesses disappeared. Because the truth couldn't be preserved in its native state. It had to be transmitted. It had to be restructured through human minds, and minds could be bent. I stared at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time, I couldn't tell if the thoughts I was thinking were fully mine. I didn't feel controlled. I didn't feel altered. But I couldn't shake the realization that the ideas didn't arrive fully formed. They had grown in me. Planted, maybe. Watered by exposure. I shut the laptop and powered everything down. An hour later, I received a call from an old source, someone I hadn't spoken to since my Seattle days. He didn't waste time. Asterisk, did you see the post? He asked. What post? Anonymous board. Same hash as your internal doc. Exact match. The propulsion spec. The lattice diagrams. The signal resonance graphs. It's all public now. Someone beat you to it. My stomach dropped. Who posted it? I asked. No handle. Just a logo split circle. 2 arrows. Looks like Janus. It wasn't sabotage. It was a handoff. I wasn't the endpoint. I was a relay. I pulled up the board. The post had only been up 37 minutes. Already, there were 2 kinds of responses. Half the comments mocked it, called it LARPing, science fiction, viral marketing. The other half analyzed, ripped it apart line by line, offering real scientific critique, asking detailed technical questions. A few users traced the resonant tone maps back to known biofeedback experiments. The document had gone viral, not as proof, but as provocation. I scrolled to the bottom. There, one comment stood out. You can't disprove what you can't interpret. And you can't interpret what you're already becoming. I read it 3 times. Then I noticed the account name at @JanusKey_archiver. Signal wasn't just real. It had been waiting. All I'd done was walk it through the front door. After the Janeski post went viral, the conversation fractured. Within hours, videos claiming to decode the diagrams popped up on fringe science channels, deep web forums, and encrypted messaging apps. Some declared it a psyop, others swore it was extraterrestrial math. But the consensus I feared most was forming in the middle, that it didn't matter where it came from, what mattered was that it worked. I shut it all off. Disconnected completely for 24 hours. I needed silence. Not signal, but the damage was done. Or maybe the evolution had already begun. I no longer trusted the dividing line between my thoughts and what had been planted. My decisions still felt like mine, but my direction, that was something else. A kind of pull, soft but persistent. It didn't tell me what to do. It showed me where to look. I returned to the last clue Angel left behind the coordinates from his journal. A dry lake bed in the Nevada desert. No name, no trail. Just a set of digits that shouldn't have meant anything. I cross-checked them with historical satellite parsers. 4 separate times in the last 18 months. Small localized bursts of magnetic interference were recorded in that exact grid. No storm activity, no tectonic movement, just pulses 2 seconds long, 12 hours apart. It wasn't random. Packed gear, grabbed to trusted contacts, Jordan Tessereau, and a field researcher named Mia Lungand. We drove in through back roads using off-grid GPS. We carried no phones, only analog sensors, signal detectors, low-frequency recorders, and old radio spectrometers. If something was broadcasting out there, we'd hear it. We arrived just before dusk. The place was barren. Not a tree, not a rise in elevation for miles. Just cracked earth, bleached white, and wind-blown grit. We parked the SUV a mile out and walked in on foot. After 30 minutes of scanning, Jordan's equipment lit up. Got a pulse, he said. 1 Hertz range. repeating every 5.8 seconds. He pulled up the waveform. It wasn't noise. It was a clean, rounded curve, like a soft heartbeat through the ground. Not from a tower, not from the sky, from below. I asked if it could be natural. No, he said flatly. Not with this consistency. This is manufactured. We triangulated the source using 3 portable sensors. It led us to the center of the lake-bedder section where the ground was slightly sunken, maybe a few inches deeper than the rest. Mia brushed aside some dust and revealed something metallic buried just under the surface. A narrow slit, maybe half a centimeter wide, extending 3 feet across. It didn't look like a hatch. It looked like a sensor panel. We set up camp just beyond it. Jordan configured a passive scanner to capture full-range signal behavior overnight. We took turns on watch. The wind never stopped, but the pulse did. Just after 2 a.m., the signal went dead. No warning, no interference. Just gone. At 2:17 a.m., Mia vanished. I was on watch. She had gone 20 feet out to check one of the ground sensors. I looked down at my notebook for maybe 15 seconds, and when I looked up, she was gone. No sound, no disturbance, just a blank space where she'd been. We searched for hours, shouted, scanned. Jordan nearly broke down, whispering that it wasn't possible that she wouldn't just walk off without saying something. But she had, or something had made it seem that way. At dawn, we found her recorder, still running. It had captured the last 30 minutes of ambient noise. I listened to it 3 times before I heard it, at exactly 2 hours, 16 minutes and 41 seconds. The wind cuts out. Then, a low tone, smooth, rising, and layered beneath it, a whisper barely audible, almost electronic. One word, stretched unnaturally long. Remember. After that, nothing. We left at first light, took different routes back to avoid tracking. Jordan didn't speak much. He handed me a small drive with the data logs and said, "Whatever this is, it's not done with us." I didn't disagree. I returned to my safe house that night and reviewed the data. The signal matched the earlier recordings pulled from the sphere. Same bass frequency, same harmonics. But this time, there was Mara, 3rd harmonic, not seen in any previous capture. It was faint but clear. When plotted visually, it formed a wave that spiraled inward, like the sketches Angel had drawn, like the structure in the Jayanski documents. This wasn't communication, it was replication. Each signal embedded into the next. Each person exposed became another mirror. Not to show the source, but to carry it forward. That was the point. Not to be heard. To echo, I isolated the new waveform and ran it through a visual encoder. The resulting image was a toroidal spiral dance in the center, tapering outward. A shape that suggested containment and release. I'd seen something like it before. Angels. Last drawing. The mirror image. I went back to the file and looked again. His final note. I am still me. I stared at those words for a long time. They were meant as reassurance. But now I wondered if they were a warning. What does it mean? To still be yourself when something else is living inside your pattern of thought. Not as an invader, as a framework. I received a final message that night. No subject, no attached file. Just a single line. The convergence begins at recognition, not belief. It was signed JNUSK, with a signal hadn't failed. It hadn't been stopped. The information had spread, and like a seed, it only needed fertile ground once. I was already listening. I drove back to Las Vegas in silence. The highway stretched endlessly, but I barely noticed. Every mile felt like a countdown, not to an event, but to a realization. Something had started months ago in that backyard, and I had been following its echoes ever since. But now it was clear I hadn't been chasing the signal. I was part of it. I parked 2 blocks from the Kenmore house and walked the rest of the way on foot. The neighborhood looked the same. Modest homes, trimmed lawns, cracked sidewalks, but the Kenmore property stood out. Boarded windows, overgrown yard. A faded "no trespassing" sign hung crooked on the gate. No lights, no sound, just a shell. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a long time. The last time anyone had seen Angel Kenmore, he'd been drawing diagrams of a place he should never have known. Now the house felt empty, but not abandoned like it was waiting. I didn't try to go inside. I didn't need to. Whatever happened, here wasn't in the walls. It was in the people who left. I visited Angel's old school next. A public charter campus a few miles away. Most of the staff had turned over since the story broke. But one teacher, Mrs. Keating, was still there. She taught art. Angel had taken her class that spring. I introduced myself as a researcher, said. I was working on a piece about memory and trauma in youth. She looked tired but nodded slowly. I think she knew who I was. He was quiet, she said, but not in a shy way. It was like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. I asked if she had anything he'd left behind. She thought for a moment, then walked to the back of the classroom and opened a storage cabinet. She pulled out a large sketch pad wrapped in a plastic sleeve. He turned this in 2 days before they left, she said. Didn't say a word, just put it on my desk and walked out. The drawing was striking. It showed 2 figures facing each other, identical in shape, same eyes, same height. One was outlined in faint pencil, the other inked in sharp, deliberate strokes. The background was a mirror cracked slightly down the center. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were 4 words, I am still me. The phrase hit harder this time, not as comfort, as ambiguity. Which version of him was speaking? I asked Mrs. Keating if he ever said where the image came from. She hesitated, then nodded. He told me the mirror wasn't glass. He said it was a place. One where your reflection remembers things before you do. That night, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of the city. I pinned the drawing to the wall and stared at it for hours. The shape, the geometry it matched. The pulse pattern Jordan recorded in the desert. The spiral, the convergence point. This wasn't art. It was a diagram of transference. One entity mirrored across 2 bodies, or one consciousness distributed across multiple cells. I turned off all lights and sat in the dark, not to hide, to feel. At 3:12 a.m. the air changed, not colder, not heavier, just tuned differently, like the frequency of the room had shifted. The lamp flickered once, even though it wasn't plugged in. I didn't move. I just listened. No sound, no movement. Then the old TV on the dresser turned on. Static, then a brief flickering image I'd seen before. Angel's face, but not a photograph. A freeze frame from the video inside the sphere. His eyes glowing faintly. Just for a moment. Then the screen went black dot. The message tone on my laptop chimed. I opened the inbox. One unread message. No subject. No sender. Just a short line. Truth lives in recursion. Attached was a compressed Video file. No metadata. No timestamp. I scanned it offline, verified it was safe. Then I played it. It was Angel **. He stood in the desert. Same clothes as in the earlier footage, but his voice was clearer now. Deliberate. If you're watching this, he said, you found the frequency. He stepped aside. Behind him, the camera slowly rotated to show a darkened shape buried in the sand, the edge of the sphere. Still partially exposed, faint pulses of light moved across its surface like veins under skin. It didn't come here to invade, Angel continued. It came to reflect, to seed a pattern. We are not the first. We are just the next. He paused. His face softened. You think you're investigating a story, but you're completing one. The screen went dark. I stared at the blank monitor. My heartbeat didn't quicken. There was no panic, only clarity. Everything made sense. The signal, the disappearances, the hesitation in the faces of insiders who knew too much. They hadn't been silenced out of fear. They were just changed, rewritten softly, like a file updated in the background, and I had already begun the process. The broadcasts, the exposure, the decoding, all mirrors. What we thought was evidence had always been a delivery system, and I was the last hop that morning. Before leaving the city, I passed a playground near the school. Children played under the morning sun. One girl sat quietly drawing in the sand with her finger. As I walked past, I glanced down. She had etched a perfect spiral, not a swirl. A pattern of inward loops with precise spacing, just like the waveform from the lake bed. I stopped, crouched down, and asked her what she was drawing. She looked up at me with clear, calm eyes and said, "He showed me how to do it." "Who?" I asked gently. "The boy in the mirror." She said. I nodded slowly. Then I stood and walked away. The convergence wasn't coming. It had already begun. The live stream was scheduled for 9 p.m. Pacific time. I'd chosen a secure relay node in an encrypted offshore environment. No tags, no alerts, no announcements, just a direct link to the core archive and a simple message I planned to post. 5 minutes before going live. If you've been watching, this is the last signal. The drive was clean. The files had been rebuilt from the distributed backups I'd hidden months earlier, cross-verified, hash-matched, and stripped of any markers. I included Angel's final video, the diagrams from Janeski, the wave from the lake bed, and the original body cam footage that began it all. I wanted people to see the full arc. Not proof, just presence. By 8:52 p.m., the connection was live and holding steady. No anomalies, no lag, just a quiet hum from the broadcast unit. The red indicator blinked, slowly waiting for input. I leaned back in my chair and watched the seconds tick down. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even tense. I just felt still, as if something had already been decided before the broadcast even began. At 8:58 p.m., the screen flickered. Not off. Just a momentary pulse, like a skipped heartbeat. Then everything went dark. Every monitor, every lamp, the modem, the backup power supply, gone. The entire room silenced in a breath. Not a blackout. Something more precise. As if the space itself had been disconnected from the grid, like an organ removed from a living body. I stood in the dark. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Then silence again. On instinct, I reached for the offline tablet I kept sealed in a Faraday pouch. I powered it. On. One file had appeared on the desktop, unlabeled, just a video icon. I opened it. The screen filled with soft static, followed by a slow transition to a familiar face. Angel. He looked older now. Not much, but enough. His hair was shorter, his posture calm. He sat in a white room with no features. Behind him, the light shifted in subtle pulses, like the inside of the sphere. He looked directly into the camera. "I couldn't let you send the broadcast," he said quietly, not because it wasn't true, but because it would have made everything noise. He paused. No emotion, just stillness. "You were never meant to prove it. You were meant to carry it." My breath caught, he continued. The object didn't arrive to conquer. It didn't arrive at all. It was activated, through us, through pattern, through recursion. And now, the reflection is complete. The screen cut to a different view, an overhead satellite image of a playground in Paris. A child sat on the edge, drawing a shape in the dirt. A spiral, identical to the one from the lake bed. The one Angel had drawn. The one I'd seen on the paper. The one etched into the diagrams on the Janeski files. The video cut back to Angel. "It's already happening," he said. "And it doesn't require belief, just exposure." The screen went black dot. Then a final line of text appeared. "We do not arrive. We emerge." The tablet shut off. I sat there in the dark for a long time, watching nothing, listening to the stillness. The moment felt endless, suspended in some liminal space between silence and signal. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just breathed. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. I understood now why none of the footage lasted, why no upload ever held. The information wasn't supposed to stay. It was supposed to pass through us, into the next dot, not as knowledge, dot as pattern. I packed up the equipment, left the room just after 10 p.m. I didn't bother wiping the drives. They were already blank. I walked to the car and drove west, away from the lights, away from the noise. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to keep moving. 3 hours later, I stopped at a diner off a rural highway. Inside, the waitress was humming softly. A boy at the counter was scribbling on a placemat. I glanced down as I passed. He had drawn the sphere, same contours, same glow, and beside it, 2 figures, one human, one not. They were holding hands. Didn't say anything. I paid in cash and stepped outside. The night sky above was clear. No drones, no lights, just stars, wide and constant. I felt no urgency anymore, no burden. Just awareness, not that something was coming, but that something had already arrived through drawings, dreams, diagrams, through people like Angel, through people like me. It was never about proof. It was about reflection. I didn't need to publish anything. I didn't need to convince anyone. The transmission was complete.